The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the sunrise over the harbor or the soft sound of waves lapping at the pier. It was the pile of splintered wood scattered across the shoreline where my boathouse used to stand. The frame had been ripped apart, the dock planks stacked haphazardly, and the small ramp I had built for my fishing skiff was gone completely. For a moment, I thought a storm had swept through overnight. But the skies were clear, the water calm, and then I saw her, Karen, standing there at the edge of the rubble with her arms crossed, wearing that smug little smile I'd come to know all too well. She didn't even look guilty. In fact, she looked proud, like she had just done the neighborhood some great service. "Took you long enough to come see it," she called out. That monstrosity was an eyesore. Against HOA coastal regulations, we had to act before it damaged the property values around here. Her words echoed over the water, sharp and arrogant. A few neighbors peeked from their decks and porches, whispering to one another. Some shook their heads, others avoided my gaze altogether, but none of them stepped forward. I walked slowly toward the wreckage, every step measured. "You did this?" My voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the edge beneath it. Karen lifted her chin, almost daring me to challenge her. "Of course," the board voted. "We have authority over every structure on this shoreline, and your little shack didn't meet our standards. You should be thanking me. It was unsafe, unlicensed, and frankly, an embarrassment to the neighborhood." Crouched down, picked up a broken beam and ran my hand over the fresh-cut marks from the chainsaw. This wasn't a storm. This was deliberate, premeditated, and she was standing here proudly admitting it. For a long moment, I said nothing, just studied the debris, then studied her. Karen must have mistaken my silence for surrender because she smirked and added, "Don't bother complaining. The HOA rules are final, and trust me, you won't be rebuilding anything here without our approval." I stood, brushed the sawdust from my hands, and looked her dead in the eye. Karen thought she had won. She thought her little HOA rules were the highest authority on this harbor. But what she didn't know was that she had just crossed into waters far bigger and far more dangerous than any neighborhood board could ever imagine. Karen didn't waste a second capitalizing on the little audience gathering at the docks. A few HOA board members had already joined her, clipboards in hand, nodding along like obedient soldiers. One of them, a balding man in a polo shirt tucked too tightly into his shorts, stepped forward with a sheet of paper. "This was a unanimous decision," he declared. "Your boathouse violated HOA shoreline aesthetics, exceeded the maximum dock length, and posed a safety hazard. We've logged multiple complaints, and as of last night, the board voted to remove it." The words were rehearsed, almost theatrical. He waved the paper like it was a court order, though anyone with half a brain could see it was just a HOA notice stamped with their logo. I kept my voice steady. That boathouse was built under permit. State and county signed off on every dimension, every safety feature. I have the approvals right here. I pulled a folder from my truck parked nearby, flipping open the clear sleeves that held stamped permits, official letters, and inspection sign-offs. I held them up so everyone could see. "This isn't a backyard shed. It's a federally compliant harbor structure, reviewed and cleared at every level," the crowd murmured. Some neighbors leaned closer, eyes darting between the stamped documents and the smug faces of the board. Karen scoffed loudly, cutting through the whispers. "Paperwork doesn't matter here," she snapped. "This is private property, and our community rules override your so-called permits. You can waive those forms all day long, but we protect this shoreline, not you." Her confidence was ironclad, almost delusional. She actually believed a neighborhood committee outweighed county engineers and state inspectors. The other board members nodded, puffing their chests as if HOA bylaws were the Constitution itself. I placed the folder carefully back in my truck, taking my time. "Let me get this straight," I said finally, locking eyes with Karen. "You tore down a permitted, legal, inspected structure because you didn't like how it looked?" Karen smirked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not just me, the entire board. And if you think calling the police will help you, good luck. We already notified them, and they know we were within our rights." As if on cue, 2 squad. Cars rolled up, lights flashing but no sirens. Officers stepped out, scanning the scene. Karen waved at them like a queen greeting her guards. "There he is," she said, pointing at me. "He built an unsafe, unlicensed structure on HOA property. We had to demolish it for everyone's safety." The officers glanced at me, then at the splintered remains of my boathouse, their expressions carefully neutral. One of them pulled out a notepad. "Sir, can we see your documentation?" Karen's grin widened, certain the tide was turning in her favor. But I didn't move quickly. I didn't need to, because I knew something she didn't. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was about federal law. The officers examined my permits carefully, their brows furrowed. They weren't rookies. They could tell the paperwork was legitimate. But they also knew HOA disputes had a way of getting messy, and the last thing they wanted was to get dragged into what they thought was a civil matter. "Looks like your paperwork is in order," the taller officer said slowly. "But the HOA claims you didn't have their authorization. This may be something you'll need to take up with them in court." Karen jumped in before I could speak. "Exactly. Thank you, officer. See, even the police agree he has no authority here. He's been squatting on our shoreline, building structures that endanger everyone." Her voice was shrill now, riding the edge of hysteria, but she cloaked it as righteous outrage. She pointed at the broken wood, at the water, even at my fishing skiff tied to a temporary mooring buoy. That boat could have caused damage during storms. That dock could have collapsed and hurt children. We acted to protect the community. A few neighbors murmured agreement, emboldened by her theatrics. Others stayed quiet, shifting uneasily, clearly beginning to wonder if maybe Karen had overstepped. I kept my hands in my pockets, watching the performance unfold. She was digging her own grave with every exaggerated accusation. The officers scribbled notes letting her rant. Finally I spoke, my voice calm, deliberate. "So let me get this straight. You admit you authorized the demolition?" Karen tossed her head proudly. "Of course, I told you, the board voted unanimously. We don't need your permission to enforce our rules." One of the officers shifted, uncomfortably. "Ma'am, just to clarify, did you file any permits with the city before beginning demolition, or notify the county about altering shoreline property?" Karen blinked. The smug smile wavered, just slightly. "We don't have to. HOA authority supersedes local ordinances. Everyone knows that." That was the crack I'd been waiting for. The neighbors started whispering louder now, some shaking their heads. Even the board members beside her seemed uneasy, their confidence faltering under the weight of her arrogance. I didn't push yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch, the officers exchanging skeptical glances. The more Karen spoke, the more obvious it became that she had no idea what she was talking about. She jabbed a finger toward me. "Don't just stand there smug, thinking. Your little folder of papers makes you untouchable. This is our community, and you don't get to bully us with your supposed permits. If anything, you should be fined for every day that shack stood out here." Her voice rose louder, nearly shrieking. "Mark my words, you'll regret ever building on this shoreline without our approval." I finally stepped forward, close enough that even Karen had to take a half step back. My tone was still calm, but my words carried the weight of something far more serious. "Karen," I said evenly, "you just admitted in front of witnesses and law enforcement to authorizing an unpermitted demolition on a navigable harbor." Her face paled, but she covered it quickly with another sneer. "So what? The HOA rules allow it." The officers looked at each other. They knew, as I did, that she had no clue just how deep she'd sunk, and that was when I decided it was time to stop letting her play queen of the shoreline. It was time for the reveal. The crowd had grown thicker by now. Neighbors lined the boardwalk, some recording with their phones, others whispering about whether Karen had finally gone too far. The two officers stood between us, still holding my paperwork, but their eyes lingered on me, as if they sensed there was something I hadn't yet said. Karen, meanwhile, was drunk on her own arrogance. She paced in front of the broken beams like a prosecutor before a jury. "You see?" she shouted, spinning toward the neighbors. "This man thinks his paperwork makes him untouchable, but the HOA decides what stands and what falls here. That's how it works in our community. If we let one person ignore the rules, soon everyone will do whatever they want." I let her have her moment, let her words echo across the docks, let her dig the hole deeper until the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush her smug confidence. Then I stepped forward. "Karen," I said evenly, "you believe the HOA's rules supersede local, state, and federal law?" Her chin lifted proudly. "That's right. Around here our word is law." The taller officer gave her a look that was half disbelief, half pity. He glanced at me, as though silently asking me to finish this. So I did. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a slim leather case, flipping it open for the crowd and the officers to see. The gold badge glinted in the morning sun. "Federal Harbor Inspector," I said clearly. My voice carried over the water, steady as steel. "By authority of the United States Department of Transportation and the Coast Guard, I oversee the construction, demolition, and maintenance of all structures built on or near federally protected harbors. That includes docks, ramps, and—" I gestured at the wreckage of my boathouse. "This." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The officers straightened immediately, their postures shifting from cautious neutrality to firm respect. One of them nodded sharply. "Sir," he said, "we had no idea." Karen's face drained of color. "Well, what? No, you can't just—" She turned to the officers, her voice cracking. "He's bluffing. He's making this up. HOA rules still apply here." But even the board members beside her weren't nodding anymore. One of them pulled out his phone, quickly searching something. His face went pale when he found whatever confirmation he needed. "Karen," he muttered. "He's not bluffing." I held up a document from my folder, this one stamped not just by the county, but with the federal seal. Every nail, every beam, every inch of this boathouse was approved through federal inspection. And as a harbor inspector, it was not only legal for me to build it, it was my job to ensure it was safe and compliant. What you did here wasn't just a violation of some neighborhood rule. It was a federal crime. Karen stumbled back, her bravado collapsing like the boathouse she destroyed. That's not possible," she whispered. But the officers were already moving. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside," one said firmly. The murmurs of the neighbors grew into open chatter now, some in shock, some in thinly veiled satisfaction. Phones were up everywhere, capturing every second of Karen's fall from grace. I closed the badge case and slipped it back into my pocket. "You thought this harbor was yours to control," I said, locking eyes with her one last time. "But this water doesn't belong to you or the HOA. It belongs to the people, and you had no right to destroy what was built here legally." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She looked smaller now, cornered, stripped of the false authority she had wielded for so long. And the tide had turned completely. Karen stood frozen on the dock, her eyes darting between the badge still burning in everyone's memory and the officers now squarely focused on her. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced with the dawning realization that she was no longer in control of the narrative. The taller officer adjusted his stance and spoke firmly. "Ma'am, you've admitted to authorizing the demolition of a federally permitted structure without going through proper channels. That's destruction of property, but given the federal permits involved, this could extend to federal charges. We're going to need you and your board members to come with us for questioning." The crowd erupted. Some neighbors gasped, others whispered excitedly, and a few, those who had suffered under Karen's constant harassment, actually smiled. For once, the iron grip of the HOA tyrant was cracking wide open for all to see. Karen threw up her hands in panic. "You can't do this. I was protecting the community. That's my duty as HOA president." Her voice trembled now, the desperation bleeding through. She pointed at me again, weaker this time. "He's lying. He has to be." But one of her own board members stepped forward, shaking his head. His voice was low, but carried enough for everyone to hear. "Karen, he's not lying. I looked it up myself. Federal harbor inspectors oversee shoreline structures. We had no authority to touch that boathouse. That betrayal, that public acknowledgement, hit harder than anything I could have said." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The officers moved in, one gently but firmly guiding her away from the edge of the dock. "You'll have your chance to explain in detail, ma'am," the officer said, his tone clipped. "But from what we've seen and heard today, it doesn't look good for you." Karen's shrieks echoed down the dock as she was led toward the squad car. "This isn't over. I'll sue every one of you. Her voice cracked into a sob as the door slammed shut. The rest of the board members stood stiffly, pale and silent. Some were asked to accompany the officers, others were told they'd be contacted later for statements. The power they once strutted around with was gone, replaced with the nervous realization that they'd followed Karen blindly into something far bigger than a neighborhood dispute. I turned back toward the wreckage of my boathouse, the water lapping gently against the broken beams. A few neighbors approached, hesitant but supportive. "Didn't know you were, federal," one man admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry we didn't step in sooner. Karen made everyone too scared to speak up." I gave him a small nod. Fear only works until someone shines a light on it. Now that she's exposed, things can change. And change they did. Over the next weeks, the HOA's influence crumbled. Karen faced charges for property destruction, abuse of authority, and violating federal harbor protections. The board was restructured under court supervision, with new elections forced by the county. For the first time in years, neighbors felt free to speak their minds without worrying about Karen's wrath. As for my boathouse, it didn't take long before I had approval to rebuild. This time, when the construction crews arrived, neighbors came down to the dock to lend a hand, some hammering nails, others bringing food and drinks. The very people Karen claimed to be protecting now stood united, not under fear but under fairness. And when the last beam was set, and the boathouse stood proud once again against the harbor waters, I couldn't help but smile. Not because I had won against Karen, but because the harbor was whole again, and the community had finally broken free of her chokehold. In the end, Karen thought she could control the shoreline with her rules and her arrogance, but rules mean nothing when they stand against the law, and this time the tide had washed her reign away for good. Karen thought she owned the harbor, but the law proved her wrong. If you want to see more insane HOA meltdowns and justice served, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to HOA Karen Stories, and turn on the so you never miss when another entitled HOA tries to mess with the wrong person. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if Karen demolished your property? Because trust me, this is just the beginning. The next story will blow your mind.